Every morning at 6:15, Arthur Keene unlocks the front door of Keene's Hardware and flips the sign to open. 63 years old, gray at the temples. The kind of man people walk past without a second glance. He wears the same charcoal cardigan 3 days a week and drinks his coffee black, alone, at the counter of Pera's Diner, 2 blocks down. He always sits facing the door. He always takes the seat closest to the exit. Nobody in this neighborhood notices that detail. Nobody asks why. In protective work, this is called keeping a clear sightline. Professionals never sit with their back to a room. Most people never learn the habit in the first place. Arthur never lost it. For 11 years, this has been his life. A small store, a quiet street, a town that doesn't ask questions, mostly because nobody here has ever had a reason to. He fixes leaky faucets for old widows and doesn't charge them. He remembers every regular's order. He is, by every visible measure, an unremarkable man living an unremarkable life, which is exactly how he wants it. There was a different life before this one. He doesn't talk about it, not even to himself most days. A career that took him through countries whose names never made it into the local paper, doing work that doesn't get written down anywhere official, the kind of work that leaves a man either dead by 40 or hollowed out by 60 if he's lucky enough to walk away from it in one piece. Arthur walked away. He chose this town specifically because nothing ever happens here. He chose hardware specifically because it's the most boring trade he could think of. Pipes, paint, nails, nothing that ever asks a question or demands a decision faster than a customer can finish a sentence. He thought that would be enough. For 11 years it was. Lena Pavlova works the early shift at Pera's. 22, quick smile, faster hands, the kind of waitress who remembers your name after one visit. Arthur has watched her for 3 months now. The way you watch weather settle in before a storm. Small signs, easy to miss if you're not trained to look for them. A flinch every time the bell over the door rings too hard. Long sleeves in August. A phone she checks under the table, never on top of it, like she's hiding the act of checking it. And every night at closing, a black SUV idles outside. Nobody else seems to notice it. Arthur notices everything. He clocks the plate without meaning to. Old habit, the kind that never fully switches off no matter how many years pass. He clocks the driver too. A young man who never gets out, never orders coffee, just watches the diner's front door like he's waiting for a delivery. Arthur has seen this exact arrangement before, in other cities, under other names. A vehicle that exists to remind someone they're being watched is rarely subtle by accident. It's subtle on purpose. Because the point isn't to hide, it's to make sure the person being watched never forgets they're not free. He doesn't ask. Not yet. He just starts leaving bigger tips and one extra word every morning. You all right? Small. Easy to dismiss. The kind of question a tired waitress can wave off with fine, just tired, and move on. But Arthur knows tired. And this isn't tired. What Lena never says, what Arthur has already pieced together from fragments, the way he was trained to piece together fragments, is that she didn't come to this country the way the paperwork claims. A job offer that turned into a debt the moment she landed. A debt that grew every week for rent she never agreed to, for a contract she never read in a language she understood. Her passport has been held for safekeeping by a man named Yuri Bratko since the day she arrived. This is how it works in places nobody looks too closely. Isolate someone from everything familiar. Manufacture an obligation too large to ever pay off. Make leaving feel more dangerous than staying. It rarely needs chains. A debt does the job quietly enough. Lena works the diner shift to look ordinary during the day. At night, she works somewhere else. A club called the Onyx Room, 3 miles east, where Yuri collects what he calls the difference. Arthur has said nothing about any of this. Not one word. He simply watches, the way a man watches a fire he hasn't decided yet whether to put out. Then, on a Tuesday, Lena doesn't show up for her shift. By Wednesday, the diner owner says she quit, just like that, no notice. Arthur doesn't believe it for 1 second. He's watched this woman show up with a fever rather than leave her coworkers short-staffed. People who care that much about not letting others down do not vanish without a word. He goes to her apartment building that evening. Her name is still on the buzzer. Nobody answers. A neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Okafor, who waters the building's one sad hallway plant, tells him in a hushed voice that she saw two men carry Lena out 2 nights ago. She wasn't walking right, the old woman says, eyes down. I didn't want trouble, so I didn't say anything. Arthur thanks her, goes home, sits in his small kitchen for a long time without turning on the light. In a locked drawer beneath his bed, a drawer that hasn't been opened in over a decade, there is a metal case. He doesn't open it that night, not yet, but for the first time in 11 years, his hand rests on top of it for a long moment before he walks away. He thinks instead, for a while, about the rules he made for himself when he closed that case the last time. Never again unless there's no other way. Never again unless someone who can't protect themselves needs protecting. He has kept those rules for 11 years without once being tested. Tonight, lying awake, he can feel the test arriving. In the morning, he opens the store like always, sweeps the front step like always. But he closes early, a handwritten sign taped to the glass. Back in 1 hour. The first time in 11 years, he's closed Keen's Hardware in the middle of a weekday. He drives past the Onyx room first, slow, just once, the way a man casing a building does without ever looking like he's casing anything. 2 exits, 1 camera, angled wrong, covering the alley instead of the door, a bouncer who checks his phone more than he checks the street. Amateur work, the kind of security that exists to look intimidating rather than actually be effective. Arthur notes all of it without breaking his stride, the same way another man might notice the weather. Tomorrow, the quiet man behind the hardware counter is going to ask a few questions at the Onyx room. Yuri Bratko has no idea what's about to walk through his door. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching this from right now, and what time it is where you are. I read every single one. The Onyx room doesn't open until 9, but Arthur arrives at 7, while the staff is still setting up. He walks in through the front door like he owns the place. No hesitation, no nerves. The calm of a man who has walked into far worse rooms than this one and walked back out again. A bouncer the size of a refrigerator steps in front of him. We're closed. I won't be long, Arthur says. I'm here to see Yuri. I want to pay off a debt. Something about the way he says it, flat, unbothered, like he's settling a bar tab, makes the bouncer pause just long enough to let him through. Yuri Bratko is in the back office, counting cash, when this gray-haired man in a cardigan walks in unannounced. He laughs before Arthur even finishes his sentence. You want to buy Lena's contract? Old man, you have no idea what that number even is. Arthur sets an envelope on the desk anyway. Count it. If it's short, I'll come back with the rest. Yuri doesn't count it. He waves 2 men in from the hallway instead. He's not leaving on his own, Yuri says. Almost bored. Teach him some manners. Nothing broken, just enough that he remembers. What happens in the next 90 seconds is the part nobody in that room will ever fully explain to anyone, because nobody who was conscious for all of it stays quiet about their own role in what comes next. The first man swings. He never connects. Arthur steps inside the punch instead of away from it. Closing distance is the last thing an untrained fighter expects, and the man is on the floor before his fist finishes its arc. The second man reaches for something at his waistband. He doesn't get the chance to finish that motion either. There is no wasted movement, no shouting, no wild swinging, just economy, the kind of economy that only comes from years of doing this for a living, where every motion either ends a threat or it doesn't happen at all. The whole room goes quiet in a way that feels almost obscene against the bass. Still thumping faintly through the wall from the empty dance floor outside, Yuri's 2 men are on the carpet. One isn't moving. The other is trying to crawl toward the door and has clearly decided, somewhere in the last 4 seconds, that this job no longer pays enough. Yuri backs against the wall, hand frozen halfway to the drawer where he keeps a pistol. Who are you? Arthur doesn't answer that question. He never does. Instead, he picks the envelope back up off the desk, peels 2 bills from it, and sets them gently in front of Yuri. For your trouble. Then, quieter, colder, Lena's debt is paid, in full. As of right now, if anyone touches her, or so much as looks at her wrong, I will come back here, and next time, I won't bring an envelope. Most people who land on this channel watch one video and disappear. Only about 3 in 100 ever come back for the next one. You just sat through that whole scene with me, heart in your throat, wondering if that envelope was a mistake. That's the feeling I try to give you every single time. It costs nothing to stay, just one tap. You're not subscribing to a channel. You're joining the few who actually stick around for the rest of the story. Hit it, and let's keep settling the score together. By the time Arthur walks back out onto the street, 2 men are on the floor of that office. Yuri is shaking, and somewhere across town, Lena is sitting in the back of Arthur's car, finally safe for the first time in 11 months, sobbing quietly into her hands while a man she barely knows drives her somewhere he promises is secure. He doesn't tell her anything about who he used to be, not yet. She doesn't ask. Some kinds of relief don't leave room for questions. They just leave room for breathing, finally, all the way down into your lungs for the first time in months. But word travels fast in rooms like Yuri's. Within 48 hours, the man who controls Yuri, a local boss named Nikolai Sorokin, known on the street simply as Kolya, hears that some nobody hardware store owner walked into his club and put 2 of his men in the hospital without breaking a sweat. Kolya laughs it off at first. One old man, in a cardigan, who paid a debt in cash and walked out the front door like he was leaving a dry cleaner's. He tells Yuri to find out where this man lives, drop a brick through his window, and move on with business. He will not be laughing for very long. By the end of the week, 3 of his soldiers will have learned exactly how badly he underestimated the man behind that hardware counter. And Kolya himself is about to start asking questions that nobody in his organization can answer. Kolya Sorokin runs 6 blocks of this city the way most men run a business. Quietly, efficiently, with just enough violence to keep the machine humming and just little enough to avoid real police attention. He has never once lost a soldier to a man working alone. So the first thing he does is try to find out exactly who this Arthur Keene actually is. It should take an afternoon. It takes a week and still comes back empty. There's no military record under that name that anyone in Kolya's circle can locate. No criminal history, no flags, no aliases, nothing connecting him to anyone dangerous. Just a hardware store, a small apartment, a quiet life that's been quiet for over a decade. This is, in itself, the most unsettling discovery of all, because a man with nothing to hide doesn't usually leave a paper trail this clean. In intelligence work, that kind of clean record is sometimes called a legend, a constructed, ordinary life built specifically to survive exactly this type of search. The less interesting a man looks on paper, the harder he usually is to find. Kolya doesn't know the term, but he understands, on instinct, that he's looking at exactly that. He sends a man to watch the hardware store for 3 straight days. The report comes back almost insulting in how boring it is. The old man opens at 6:15, sweeps the step, sells paint and pipe fittings to retirees, closes at 6, eats alone, nothing. Kolya starts to wonder if he imagined the whole thing, right up until the second report comes in, the one explaining where his accountant ended up. Across town, Detective Ray Holloway is having a strange week of his own. 2 of Kolya's men, hospitalized, refusing to say who hurt them. Then, 3 nights later, a known Onyx room accountant turns up, zip-tied to a fire hydrant outside the 14th precinct, with a folder of financial records taped to his chest. Records detailing every dollar the club has laundered through 3 different shell businesses in the past 2 years. Holloway has been a cop for 19 years. He has never once seen a vigilante leave evidence this organized. Whoever is doing this isn't angry. They're working. He pins the folder to his board next to a single word, written in his own handwriting, ghost. Arthur, for his part, has not stopped. While Lena recovers in a safe house 2 counties over, a cousin of Mrs. Okafor's, someone with no connection to either of them on paper, Arthur spends his nights quietly dismantling the rest of Kolya's operation. The safe house where 2 more trafficked women are being held. The dirty accountant, the supply route. Piece by piece, the machine that built Lena's debt starts coming apart. The night he finds the second location, a converted motel on the edge of town with the curtains permanently drawn in 3 rooms. He almost turns around, 2 women inside, neither of them speaking much English, both of them flinching when he opens the door instead of relaxing, because in their experience, men who open locked doors at night have never once been there to help. It takes him almost 20 minutes just to get them to believe he isn't one of Kolya's men checking on the merchandise. He doesn't say much. He just leaves the door open and walks back to his car and waits, and eventually, one at a time, they follow him out into the night air on their own terms, which is the only way it was ever going to work. He never takes a life he doesn't have to. He doesn't need to. Fear does most of the work once people understand what happens to the ones who don't cooperate. Kolya retaliates the only way he knows how, not against a man he can't find, but against the one address connected to him that everyone in town actually knows. Keen's Hardware. 3 men firebomb the storefront at 2 a.m. Arthur is there when it happens. He'd been sleeping in the back office for a week, expecting exactly this. He gets 2 of the 3 men out cold before the fire forces him out the back door, and the third puts a bullet through his shoulder on the way. For the first time in this entire war, Arthur Keen bleeds. It's a small wound. It will heal. The fire takes most of the back office and half the front shelving before the engines arrive, and Arthur watches it from across the street, pressing a folded shop rag against his shoulder, feeling something he hasn't felt in 11 years. Not pain, he's felt worse than this, but exposure. The realization that the quiet life he built brick by brick is now visibly, permanently on fire, and there is no version of tomorrow where he simply goes back to sweeping the front step like nothing happened. It changes something in him, the understanding that he cannot stay invisible anymore, that hiding behind a quiet cardigan and a hardware counter is no longer an option once your name is the one thing your enemy is hunting hardest for. By the next morning, he has stopped playing defense entirely. Kolya, meanwhile, has run out of moves. His club is gutted. His accountant is gone. His safe houses are compromised. His men are too afraid to work the street at night. He has lost, completely, to a man whose face he's never even seen up close. He sits alone in what's left of his office one night, staring at a city map with red pins marking every location he's lost in the last 2 weeks. And for the first time in his career, he understands something every soldier eventually has to learn the hard way. There is a difference between being feared and being good, and he has spent 15 years confusing the two. So he does the one thing he swore he'd never have to do. He picks up a phone, and he calls a number that very few people in his organization are ever given. A number that connects, 3 rings later, to a man named Dmitry Volkov, the one person the entire Eastern Network calls when a problem can't be solved with soldiers anymore. "I need you here," Kolya says, voice shaking in a way it's never shaken before. "There's something wrong with this old man, something I don't understand." On the other end of the line, there's a long pause. Then, calm as ever, "I'll be there tomorrow night." Dmitry Volkov does not look dangerous. That's the first thing anyone notices, and it's exactly the point. Mid-50s, soft-spoken, dressed like a man who reads quarterly reports rather than one who solves problems with bodies. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. In the organization, Volkov has a reputation that none of the younger soldiers fully understand until they've watched him work once. He doesn't solve problems with force. He solves them by finding the one piece of leverage that makes force unnecessary. He flies in on a red-eye and goes straight to the burned-out shell of what used to be the Onyx Room. Before even checking into a hotel, he walks the floor slowly, hands behind his back, the way a building inspector walks a condemned property. He's not looking for blood or bullet holes. He's looking for patterns. What was taken, what was left behind, what order things happened in. By the time he leaves, he already knows 3 things about the man he's hunting that Kolya never managed to figure out in 2 full weeks. This man has done this before. This man has rules he won't break. And this man has exactly one weakness, which is that he clearly cares more about other people's safety than his own. He arrives in the city, takes one look at Kolya's notes, and dismisses almost all of it within 10 minutes. "You've been trying to find out who he was," Volkov says. "Wrong question. We don't need to know who he was. We need to know who he loves. Kolya, visibly smaller in this man's presence than he's been in front of anyone in years, just nods. It takes Volkov 4 days to find Mrs. Okafor's name, 5 to trace it to the safe house 2 counties over. By the 6th day, he knows exactly where Lena Pavlova has been hiding this entire time and exactly what she means to the man everyone else has been calling a ghost. He doesn't share this information with Kolya. Volkov has learned, over many years and many cities, that information is the only currency that matters, and he never spends it carelessly. He doesn't move on her right away. Instead, he does something far more unsettling. He sends Arthur a single photograph through an unmarked envelope, slid under the hardware store's front door overnight. Lena, asleep, photographed from outside her bedroom window at the safe house. No threat written underneath, none needed. I'll be honest with you, most people watching this won't still be here in 10 minutes. And that always quietly breaks my heart a little, because you just sat through the whole thing with me up to this point. Following along costs you nothing but a tap. This isn't about growing a number for me. It's about you becoming one of the few who actually finish the story, instead of walking away before the ledger gets settled. Stay till the end with me. Let's see how this old man pays his debt. Arthur understands the message instantly. This isn't Kolya anymore. Kolya threw fire and bullets and hoped something landed. This is something else entirely. A man, patient enough to find the one thread that matters and pull it slowly, just to prove he can. For the first time since this began, Arthur Keene is afraid. Not for himself. He stopped being afraid for himself a very long time ago, in places far from this city, doing work he doesn't talk about. He's afraid for a 22-year-old waitress who only ever wanted a fresh start, and for an old woman who watered a hallway plant and told the truth when it would have been so much easier to say nothing. He paces the back office of the half-rebuilt hardware store for almost an hour before he lets himself feel any of it fully. The old, familiar pressure behind the ribs that he hasn't carried in over a decade. The specific kind of fear that doesn't come from danger to yourself, but from someone else holding all the leverage. He remembers, distantly, being trained to recognize this exact feeling in other people, in rooms on the other side of the world. He never expected to feel it again standing in his own store. He calls the safe house that night and tells Lena to move. Now, no questions, no packing. He's too late by 11 minutes. When he arrives, the safe house is empty. The back door open, no sign of struggle, which somehow makes it worse. Volkov's men don't need to struggle with anyone. They simply take what they came for. A phone left behind on the kitchen counter rings once Arthur picks it up. Volkov's voice, calm as ever, on the other end. "Mr. Keene, I think it's time we finally spoke directly, instead of through other people's mistakes. Where is she? Safe, for now. Whether that stays true depends entirely on you. I'm told you run a hardware store. Charming. Be there alone, tomorrow at midnight. Come exactly as you are, and I do mean exactly. No tricks, no friends, no police. Or the next photograph I send you won't be of her sleeping." The line goes dead. Arthur stands in the empty kitchen holding a phone that isn't his, listening to a dial tone, and for one long moment he is not a hardware store owner at all. He is exactly what he was the last time anyone spoke to him in that tone of voice. A problem someone is about to regret creating. Arthur stands alone in the gutted-out hardware store he's owned for 11 years. The same store he built a quiet life inside of, brick by brick, specifically so he'd never have to be the man he's about to become again. He walks to the back office, unlocks the drawer beneath his desk, opens the metal case for the first time in over a decade. Tomorrow at midnight, Dmitry Volkov is going to learn exactly who he sent that photograph to. By 11 that night, Keene's Hardware no longer looks like a hardware store. It looks like exactly what 11 years of training taught Arthur to build out of any space, given enough warning and the right materials. A kill box, built from shelving, wiring, and tools that have sat on these shelves for over a decade, finally being used for something other than fixing leaky faucets. Every aisle has been measured, every light fixture rewired to a single switch, every exit either sealed or turned into a funnel that leads exactly where Arthur wants it to lead. This is the part of the work most people never see in movies. Not the fighting itself, but the hours of quiet preparation beforehand that make the fighting almost unnecessary by the time it starts. A man who controls when the lights go out, where the only open path leads, and what's waiting along that path has usually already won the fight before the first punch is ever thrown. He works alone, the way he's always preferred to. No backup, no plan B beyond the one he's building with his own hands. By midnight, the store he spent 11 years filling with paint cans and pipe fittings has become something closer to a trap built by a man who's had over a decade to think about exactly how he'd do this, if it ever came to this. Volkov arrives at midnight with 4 men, confident, unhurried. He has Lena with him, hands bound, in the back seat of a black sedan parked just outside, visible through the front window, a deliberate choice. A reminder of exactly what's at stake the moment Arthur steps outside that door. She sees him through the glass and goes still, the way someone goes still when they're trying not to give an enemy a single useful reaction to read. Even now, scared as she is, she doesn't cry out. Arthur notices that and files it away as something he'll tell her later. If there is a later, that she has more steel in her than either of them ever gave her credit for. Mr. Keene, Volkov says, walking in alone, leaving his men outside as instructed. I confess, I expected someone more impressive looking. Most people do, Arthur says. Right up until they don't. Volkov studies the store for a long moment. The rewired lighting, the rearranged shelving, the way every angle seems oddly, deliberately controlled. Something in his expression shifts, just slightly. For the first time since arriving in this city, Dmitry Volkov understands he may have made an error in judgment. You've been busy, he says. You gave me till midnight, Arthur replies. I used the time. What happens over the next several minutes happens almost entirely in darkness. Because Arthur kills the lights the instant Volkov's men step through the door behind him, exactly as he planned, on a store he has owned and mapped for over a decade against men who have never set foot inside it before tonight. Home field advantage isn't a cliché in this line of work. It's often the entire fight, one by one, in the dark, among shelves of pipe fittings and rope and tools that were never designed to be weapons but become exactly that in the right hands. Volkov's men go down. No gunfire. Arthur made certain of that earlier, disabling what he could reach without anyone noticing. Just the sound of bodies hitting concrete, and silence, and one man left standing when the lights come back on. Outside, Lena flinches at every muffled thud through the storefront glass, counting them. 4 sounds, then a 5th that doesn't come, and she doesn't know yet whether that silence means it's over or means something far worse. It means it's over. Volkov, alone now, finally understands what Kolya tried and failed to explain to him days ago. This was never an old man who got lucky once in a back office. This is a professional who simply chose, for 11 quiet years, not to be one anymore, until somebody made that choice impossible. You could have just paid the debt and walked away, Volkov says, almost admiringly, hands raised, no weapon left within reach. Instead, you bled my entire network dry for one waitress. That's the part you never understood, Arthur says. It was never about the money. It's about what happens to people when men like you decide their lives are a number on a ledger. I'm just here to balance it back out. It ends quietly. It always does, with men like Arthur. No grand speech, no dramatic final blow. Just the quiet certainty of a debt finally called in full, and Volkov on the floor of a hardware store, alive but finished. His network in this city gone before sunrise. Holloway will find the 4 men outside zip-tied to the lamppost an hour later, along with a folder that, this time, has Volkov's own name written across the top. Lena is free within the hour. Mrs. Okafor, too, recovered from where Volkov's men had left her. Shaken but unharmed. 3 weeks later, Keene's Hardware reopens with a new front window and the same gray-haired man behind the counter, same cardigan, same black coffee, same seat at Para's diner facing the door. Lena works the early shift again, no longer hiding bruises under long sleeves. Finally, just tired the normal way. Tired people are tired. Mrs. Okafor brings her hallway plant a new pot, says it's been needing one for years, and doesn't mention the 3 weeks at all, because some things, between the people who lived through them, never need to be said out loud to be understood. Holloway closes his board eventually, files the case under circumstances unresolved, and tells himself he's not the kind of detective who chases ghosts that clearly don't want to be caught, though he does, every so often, find himself driving an extra block past a certain hardware store on his way home, just to glance at the lights still on inside. Nobody in this neighborhood will ever know what happened those 3 weeks. Nobody asks why an old man's hardware store needed an entirely new electrical system, or why 2 men nobody can identify left town suddenly and never came back. That's exactly how Arthur Keene wants it. Quiet, unremarkable, a debt, somewhere out there, always waiting to be settled, and a man behind a hardware counter who's never quite finished paying attention.